Hello and welcome back to my show. Today I'm going to be building a step slider and fuse. This is something that came up very recently. Step slider is where you have a little vertical or horizontal slider where you slide it across the screen. You find them in mobiles, but you only want it to stop at specific locations. I had to fix some issues with this recently. We actually had support for this, but it just didn't work in the linear case. It supported it in the radio case. And so along with it I added a few features, and today I'm just going to create that slider and play around with it and see what we can get. I've already started up Fuse, and just forewarning, I might get some weird errors because I'm actually using several branches here. This will be released in 1.4, this new feature or this fix. So you can't quite do what I'm doing today quite yet. Most of it you can, just not the stepping part. The stepping will be just ignored. There may also be some random weirdness because it's not fully tested, this version. And just a forewarning. But otherwise it should be fine. So we're going to start. I started the project up early just so we can avoid the problem of having too long startup times. Let's just start with the basic one. I always start with the client panel just because you should always do this in developing for the device. That makes sure the status bars and nav bars aren't part of your application. Obviously if you want stuff in those areas you would not actually do it this way. So let's just stick a slider in the center of the screen. Alignment equals vertical center. And we'll just use the default values, just give it a name, a slider. And just to show that it's working, text alignment equals bottom center value equals slider.value. This will just take the value from the slider and stick it in the display. There we go. And so now when I move it, get all these numbers at the bottom, and should be able to get to 100 there, but it's one of the problems with non-step sliders. It might be a very pixel accuracy thing here. And if you move this too close to the side, you might not get there. Okay. Alright, but I'll check that out. We could probably put a margin and it probably will get there. So if I do this, just stick another panel in, so we don't have stuff right in the side. This is actually a general issue on mobile devices. It's not just that. You have to be aware of mobile devices that as the user slides their finger to the side of the screen, the device stops getting input, obviously, so you're going to have the exact same problem on mobile. But now that I have plenty of space, I can get over there. So just be aware of this when doing a mobile. Never put stuff on the edge of the screen because it has the exact same problem as Preview does, that when you get over here, you stop getting input. Okay. Now, you may have something that says at the very minimum, hey, I don't want all these floating point numbers, I want integers here. So the very first one you can do is, this is called user step. I'm going to say 1 and save that. And yeah, it does reload, but we have to actually move it before you see the problem. And now you notice it's always just integer values. It still looks like it's animating the scroll, and that's just because I have such a huge number of value ranges. We have, if you step by 100, but you can actually see it you can see it jittering and it's sticking at each range. The reason it's called user step is because this only limits what the user can do. You can still stick in whatever values you want into this slider. Check something just a second. Alright, good, that's still working. To make this more apparent that something is happening, let's put in values of 20 here. And now when we slide across, now you notice that it's obviously jumping. So this works with the stock slider control, but this isn't so much fun because you notice there's one problem. It's jumping right to the next position. We might still want to animate this positioning change. To do that, we're going to have to create a completely own range control, and that's what we're going to do right now. Let's just stick this guy off at the top. Dock equals or line equals top, so we can keep it there for reference. And we'll create a new one now. We'll say Actually, let's do this correctly. Let's stick this off in a class, and we'll create a new class for this. Call it my slider, and we want to expose the controls directly on it, so let's actually call this a range control directly. Range control my slider, range control. I've not done this as a component before. It should work. My slider, yes. Now we have to do everything about it. So now if we want to stick this in the middle, for example, we can say my slider equals. Well, this should be enough to actually get it working. We'll just see that first. But obviously there's nothing there yet, because when we do a range controls don't have any standard appearance. So we're going to create an appearance, and how do I want to do it again? I keep forgetting how to set this up. We actually want to have, alright, let's just say padding on here. Padding equals 20. Then we're going to have a circle with the width equals 40, make a big circle. This lines up to 2 times the padding, I just want it the same size. Color equals 0, make it just pure black for now. And now we're going to put the alignment as centered left. But the X position, we want this to move across the control as the person moves it. So we're actually going to say the position of it is property this dot value, relative value. We want a relative value. Relative value is a value between 0 and 1 that says, that says where the slider is, times 100%. I'll explain this again once we get to that part. And the default range control, though, we can save this, and you have a square, but nothing happens. Or I have a circle, I should say. Nothing happens. The reason is because the default range control is a semantic control. It has no default interface whatsoever. So what we want to do is we want to add a linear range behavior to it. This is the standard range control behavior that lets you slide it back and forth. Okay? I might have it in the wrong place. I have to check. We have a padding issue here, but that's okay. And if you notice, I can't click anywhere else, which is kind of a problem. First of all, let's give the whole control a bit of a color, just for reference, so we can see what's happening here. DFD. And so now you can see the whole control. And you want to be able to click anywhere in this. And because we want to click anywhere, we're going to say hit test bounds. Hit test mode equals local bounds. This means other than just clicking on a circle, you can actually click anywhere in this now, and it'll go to the right place. But you notice it's slightly off, and this has to do with the padding. I think if I stick something in like this, panel, I've forgotten how to do this. We have to account for this padding here, because the linear range control just uses the okay, so we're still slightly off, which isn't making me happy. Oh no, I know why we're off. We forgot to set the anchoring on here. Anchoring again says where the item is relative to its position. We're still slightly off. Let's figure that one out now. I'm a bit confused on that one. And because you notice this one works precisely if you're actually in the right position. This might have to do with the component here. I'm just going to check it again. Okay. I'd like to figure that one out first, but actually before I figure that one out, let's put a rectangle showing where the actual bar is, so we have a good idea here. And we'll do rectangle height equals 2. And then line alignment equals vertical center. So this is the bar, and you can see the little gap at the end. This is for the padding. We don't want it to go into that area on that side as well. But if I click here, I should get right to the end, but I don't. And if I click here, I should get right to the other end, and I don't quite get there. But that might be because I put this in the wrong place again. I have to look up specifically how linear range behavior actually interprets the spacing. Okay, well actually, why don't we first actually put the text here. Let's put text as part of the control to make it interesting. Text alignment. Top center value equals property. This dot value. So we get to 99, we're supposed to get to 100, and over here, we're not really getting down to 0. We're clicking too far out, so it's actually, the range behavior is not attached to this inside padding, it's attached to the outside area. So what's happening right now is the range behavior is over the whole thing. And even though I wrote this yesterday as an example, I've forgotten what it's supposed to look like. So I'm just going to open the other file I did as a reference to see the exact structure I needed, and then I'll explain it again what I did. Alright. I don't like Sublime just as always. Didn't want to open everything. Okay, October, step linear. I actually did nothing special, I just stuck it directly on there. And so that's worked over there. Now we're going to get rid of this panel. It's just supposed to work. I didn't figure that one out. It's a little bit off, which is kind of bothering me, but I'm not quite clear on that at the moment. Now what's bothering me though is that the height is off too. Screen area is too big. Yeah, I know why, because I have padding should only be on the left and right side. That fits it into there. But it's still not using the correct area. Okay, but that's not what I want to cover now. I have to get back to that it's supposed to, and it just did in my last example. As it just does in the slider one as well. If we take the slider off, you can see it lines up perfectly. If I take the step value off, you can see in this slider, it stays within the side. There's a little bit of a lag, and that's always because of just the way the mouse is using it. Although it might be a little bit off as well. Okay. In any case, let's come back to that, and let's do the interesting bit first. Because I'm reasonably certain I had that fixed. So now, because this is a range control, we're going to take off the coloring here now. I'm going to make this a bit more sensible. Instead of saying color, let's put a stroke color as well. Stroke color, let's make the stroke color black, and stroke width equals 2. Actually, let's make it not black. Let's make it gray. Wow, that's still really super dark, so we can see the line in the middle. I'm leaving the line there just for now for debugging. We might want to change that later. This is our custom control, and we can do the same thing we did with the other one. We could say user step equals 20 on this one as well. And now it also steps to 20. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to animate this correctly. So we don't want it to immediately jump there. We want it to animate to go there. Even if the user clicks, we want it to slowly go there. And we're going to do this with the attract function. We used the attract function once before in a previous episode. Now let's do this one here. The first one we need is a configuration. And we're doing it with a normalized value. This has to relate to this relative value down here. Relative value is a normalized value. And we'll make it a smooth snap one. Smooth snap UX name equals, let's call it range snap. I can actually make this a global, so it doesn't instantiate for every control, there's just one of them. Put this X down on its own line, just move this back up with the layout parameters. And now we just attract this value instead. Not the times 100%, just the normalized part. So if I did this correctly, oh no I didn't. No, sorry, just normalized. So now you can see when I click somewhere, sorry, there's a phone ringing here. Let's ignore that. Now it animates to the destination that we want. And if the step, and you can see the value there, it's also fixed to those steps and it animates it, which is good. And this is all we did here is we used this attract function, and the linear range behavior, this is actually the one obeying the user step value, and it's where I fixed the bug recently. But the value itself is snaps, and so what we do is, because the circle doesn't care whether it's actually part of the value or not, it's not really officially part of the control, it's part of our class, but the range control itself knows nothing about it, nor does the linear range behavior. We can simply do the attracting on it, and that'll let it smoothly snap over that range. And we can also assume, what can we else assume? So that's the basics there. And you notice it snaps somewhere in the middle between the ranges. Okay. Now I'd really like to check that. I'm going to quickly load up linear range behavior and check how it determines its range, because it's supposed to be able to deal with the the padding on this. It's supposed to deal with the padding correctly. So for a moment I'm going to take this off again. The animation will still apply, and you notice it will actually lag now, just because it's always animating that value. So we're going to stick a second one in here, second dot. Equals 4, height equals 4. Just make this one completely black. And we'll use the direct value here just to show what's happening. This one's translucent, so we should be able to see it. So now you notice the black one should be following my cursor, but it should be following it exactly. The reason it's not is because the linear range behavior at the moment is taking over the entire area of the range control. I can add the color back in there so we can see that. EFE. So you can see it's slightly there. When my cursor moves to the end of the range control, the dot's at the end, but that's obviously not what we want. We want it to actually map to the correct position directly on this part of it. And when I always set this up before, I always did that. So it's kind of embarrassing that I've forgotten how to do that, but the linear range control definitely means to support that, so I'm just going to quickly check that code and see how I was supposed to set that up again. Okay, we'll go back up here. I'm just going to go into the source code, and I might have created an option for this. I think I did, and I just keep forgetting to put it here. Scroll, it's at the primitive. I'm not clear why Sublime doesn't let me open it. Yay, Sublime. Okay. Well, then I'll refer to the docs then instead. Maybe it references it should. Oops, got that all in the way. Because if it's not in the docs, I have to add in the docs how you're supposed to do this. Oh, it's probably on linear range behavior instead. And this one does it. I think it might be wrong. Let's do linear. There's nothing in particular here. Okay. It's supposed to just use the area of the size. It might not be taking into account the margin. The default here uses a circle inside a panel, which shouldn't be necessary. It does it a different way. But if we put this in here, it's still a bit off. This is bugging me because I know I went to the effort of making this work correctly. I just don't remember how I got it to work correctly. Because it's supposed to be, the end's supposed to be right here, not over here. And let's take the padding off of here, the margin on this one. This shouldn't make a difference. It should bother me if it did, actually. Good, it doesn't make a difference. You can see the rectangle. We changed the rectangle now because it's obviously in a different part of it. Still slightly off. What was this one off too? It's hard to tell because it's not. You can see it's right. Let's take its user step off. I'll just be doing some live debugging here. This one's also actually off. Now this is actually a regression because I actually fixed this once. There's definitely a way to make the linear range behavior obey this. It's supposed to take the space available to it and not something else. So let's open up the project itself. Let's convince it this way. Let's go this way. I just want to look at the source code so I can see what the problem was, because I'm positive there was a way to fix it. And just don't see it right now. We're just trying to figure out where the size is. Yeah, and this is the error. The error is really here. It's taking the position 10 to control actual size, which is wrong. It's not supposed to be taking the control size. It's supposed to be taking the size of its immediate parent. But we can probably work around that. Because it takes this size, so if we put a margin on there, but that will mean, so if we stuck a margin on instead, this is probably how it's done. Just get rid of this here, get rid of this here. Now you know the green doesn't cover over it, but now it lines up exactly with what we want. And there's space around it. But this means that the little round part is actually outside the control. Usually this isn't a problem. I mean, this is the purpose of margin. It's supposed to be allowed us to do these things. And it slowly catches up. But that'll fix it for now, so we're okay for this. I think I'm going to go back and I'm going to put an option or a fix in that says linear range behavior where it actually takes its sizing from. And I think it's supposed to take it from its immediate parent in the padding area. But although I'm not sure why control size didn't work, because control size was the correct size of it. I know why. So that must have been a defect we introduced at some point. This should just probably take the size of its immediate parent, so if I stuck this inside an inner panel, it would work correctly. I'll just fix that a bit later. But for now, using margin, we can get the same effect. Goes right to the side. The problem is if somebody sticks a margin out here, the reason we don't like using margin is because if you have your own control and you override it, it messes with that margin then. Because if they stick a 0 in here, then it will right to the side. It's okay, so we'll just define ours to be overflowing at the moment. And that's what really happens. This circle overflows the edges. For now, we'll continue like that, and I'll have to go fix that later. Get rid of this color. I'm not liking the size of this thing now, so let's just make it 15 and 30 instead. It's getting a little bit too big. It's a little bit weird. That looks more like a reasonable size. Of course, the text is a little small now. We don't really want the text there anyway, so let's just get rid of the text. If somebody wants the text, they can do it on the outside, so let's do it this way. Stack panel, alignment equals vertical center, text value equals property my slider value. Next alignment, this gets you next name equals my slider. So that also shows the text in the correct way. This slider can spec to user step equals 10. And now when we, I think I made an error. I never saved it. Press the on key again. Troubles of switching between operating systems. The keys change on you. Put panning on the panel itself, and that'll bring it away from the edges. Line up. So now we have a slider, and it has a stepping motion. Now, what I'd like to show now is maybe I have a slider, but maybe I want the user to see where these markers actually are, because if you're doing a fixed quantized input and it has very fixed ranges, it may look a little bit weird if you don't show the user where they are. So the way we can do that is by overlaying more stuff on it. So we have this range control. Now we want to lay a grid on here, or yeah, I think a grid makes sense. Grid. and column count equals, now this is going to be a bit tricky. We need the range of this control. Let's just assume it starts at 0 for now. We're going to say property this dot maximum divided by property this dot user step. This tells us how many columns we have. Let's just hope this is a integer so it works. I've never actually done this bit before. Default column equals, and this will be the weight of the average column, and we'll let it expand to fill the whole thing. And use the same thing for the count here. I'm trying to avoid using JavaScript to do these calculations. I just want to see if I can actually do it this way. Rectangle alignment equals left width equals 2, color equals something obvious at first, just so we can see it. Now, that actually got us our markers, except we're missing one, right? We need to have an extra one. But if we had an extra one, this screws up the column count. Now this is where it always gets really tricky to do these layouts, and in the charting system I made a way to fix this. You actually had, so you could actually align this correctly. So what we're going to do instead, this is fine, we're going to say alignment equals right though. And at the very end we're going to put alignment equals left. I'm going to say column equals 0, row equals 0. Just override it. Stick the same one on. Well, where'd it go? Now, there should be one over there too. That's the one I put in the bottom. Where did it go? Alignment equals, oh, yeah. It needs a width. Of course it needs a width. Okay, so now we have markers at every location, so we can see the user. Where are you going to go? We'll see the dot doesn't. The dot immediately goes there. We can just leave that for feedback for now. Okay. So this works when the minimum is 0. If the minimum wasn't 0, we'd actually have to calculate the range here. You'd have to decide in your control what makes sense. Let's clean this up just a little bit so it doesn't look so... Now this positioning of these things here, there have to be different in each of them too, so let's create a standard one so we can make it all the same. Rectangle UX class equals my slider marker width equals 2, color equals AB, anchor equals 50%, color 50%. This will position it correctly on the lines. We're still slightly off in positioning right now. So now we say my slider marker alignment equals right. And then one final one, my slider marker alignment equals left, and we override the column count and row count. The reason this works is because everything up to this point, like this in the grid, the first ones get their default positioning, and that'll put them all on the right, and then we have one additional one to the left. Okay, now this looks a bit more sane, not a colorful Christmas tree. And let's make it slightly more slider-like. I'm going to get rid of this little dot. We don't need the feedback anymore. We can do a rectangle now. And let's make it a little bit wider than it is. Just do 40. So to change the margin here so it has space. Corner radius equals 5. So now we have more like a volume slider, for example. Doesn't really need to be translucent. You wouldn't want something like this to be translucent, I guess. Or maybe, I don't know. Depends. Depends what you wanted to see in this. How else can we do this so we have a... to use the path, you can actually make this transparent in the middle. I don't really want to do that right now. Let's just leave the slider as is. Maybe we can make it a little bit darker. Well, not darker, but more opaque. Which makes it darker, of course, so let's make it brighter and more opaque. There you go. Now with the animation, we have the slider of steps to the locations. If we know this value is being quantized, we could stick the text right on the slider. Let's just make this completely opaque now. And I want to stick the text directly in here. You notice the text jumps right away. So if I click here, it immediately changed the text before it animates, which I think is okay. We don't really need to animate the change in the text value. It's actually not so good to change text, animate text anyways. So now we have it on this controller here. We have a step slider with the feedback in the middle. Obviously this will only work if the values are small, but I mean, in UIs you shouldn't be using huge values anyways. And I think that's what we have there. Is anything else we have to cover here? What else might we want to do with this? What if we wanted to make more markings in there? That's a bit of a question. Or if we wanted to change the style of these markings, we have to start doing a bit more complications here. So let's just keep with the simple markings for now. And let's see if it works with a different step size. It's stuck between the middle of them, that's fine. Alright. Now why is it still at... Okay, we have something weird happening. Put 20. We don't need this anymore. Actually, just leave it just so you can check. Why do I still have 10 spaces? Something didn't add up here. If I change the value. I don't think it reevaluated those. Okay, that's a defect. We're going to have to file. That when I change this, oh, actually I have a good idea. I know why. This .user step is not likely a reactive value. It doesn't emit a change when it's been changed, and it probably should, because otherwise nothing knows to update it. So I can change that all I want, and nothing knows that it's actually changed. It just doesn't know, the controller doesn't know it's changed, so that's why it's not updating dynamically. I'll have to file an issue on that one. Because even though we don't mean to animate with these, a lot of these values, like, it's not, user step isn't something you're going to change at runtime, but the issue is for preview here, that if you're previewing it, it has to respond to those changes. And in general, this is a bit of an issue that there's all sorts of properties we could be responding to. Do we have to make every single one of these things a reactive value so that everything knows when it changes? And the unfortunate answer is probably yes. We're not entirely certain how we do that. I mean, we know how to change it, but do we have to go through all of them and change every single one of them, or just specific ones? So far it's been a step at a time. Okay. Well, let's just go with that. We have that for now. And that's our stepped slider. I'd like to make a second one that has a vertical slider. Let's do a vertical variation of this. It's not going to be hugely different. I'd just like to show that a vertical variation can work. And we're just going to call it something different to make it simple. I'll just simplify this again, put that in the middle. Actually, I think I'm going to split this up into areas. Let's just get rid of the default slider. Don't need that anymore. And split this up into 2. Column count equals 1. Now let's stick it at the top. Well, let's stick it everywhere. And we'll make a second one called my V slider. Horizontal center, UX name equals, I wouldn't need the name anymore. Make step size 10 on this one. And it'll rightfully complain that I'm missing the class. Alright, V sliders exist, so we'll go to slider. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Save this as my V slider. And see how we can do this. The margin now, basically we swap all these values. There, 20. Smooth step is still the same. The rectangle now we're going to make it, we'll keep the same width because this is actually, wait, what for width? Which means this has to become 15 because we're doing the height. And instead of X we apply Y. And we do top center. Text alignment to center is still fine. Linear range behavior has an orientation parameter that defaults to 0. Orientation equals vertical. Set that property vertical by default. And the rectangle in the middle of the slider ring is now a width. And it's a horizontal center. Column count. Now we have a row count, and to simplify this, I'm going to say column count equals 1. I can explain later why we didn't have to do both in the other mode. Height equals 2. It's going to be a new name so it doesn't conflict with the other one. My V slider marker and my V slider marker. Count alignment equals bottom. Now let's see what syntax error I probably made. My slider. Oh, it's good to actually change the name of the class. There, and we have a vertical slider as well. Okay. And it's also stepped, and user step of 10. Now, there's one other feature I added to this. Let's show it with the non-slider first, so let's add another. It's always hard to divide these things up into regions, so let's make this, well, this is stuck in this size, so in the top part, let's put a couple of them stack panel, alignment equals center. And let's stick a normal slider in. just stick in the panel one. Slider and normal slider, and on top of it text value equals stick this in the top so we can see what it is. Oh, that's wrong. Line equals center. Vertical center to avoid that. Make sure nothing hit test mode equals none, so it doesn't steal our mouse hit test on this. And we can do expressions here. I don't care about the decimal parts. Let's do floor equals 1. Well, that didn't work. Oh, yeah. Because this is a string, it's by default in string mode. So floor is part of the string, so we can escape into numeric or expression mode instead. Now we just completely ignore the fact that there's decimal values. This isn't actually user step, we're just ignoring the fact that there's decimal values. Because what it wanted to show is a different option here. Now these are all 0 to 100 just because that's the default range of a slider. The default range of a slider is 0 to 100. By default we can also make it 0 to 50, for example. And now it's 0 to 50. And I'm actually going to take this outside because it looks a little bit weird on top. Give it a bit of spacer, actually space it away from the other ones. Okay. Now, before, it's occasionally you want a slider that goes the other direction, from 0 to 50. You could just do this in your actual handling of the data, just invert the range, but that's not as elegant, so I simply made the option that the range can be in any order now. And so the left side is 50, and the right side is 0, and everything in between. Because of this, though, you can see how this might be a problem if I use a custom slider. Because of the way we did those tabs, we do the same thing, range equals 50 to 0. Where'd my, okay, it has the same name. These don't even need names, these ones, so just get rid of it. Okay. User step is a bit too high for that, so let's put it down to 5. Now you notice it actually steps correctly, but all our lines are off because we made that horrible assumption about the range. We said the range is just maximum. So what we actually need to do is set the set how many of these there actually are. So if we do this down here, property this dot minimum. So we just take this range. This is going to be negative though, which is annoying. So we'll say the absolute of the range divided by user step. And I'm just going to ignore this up here. I'm just going to let it go on its own and see if that actually works. And it doesn't actually work. Now why not? If I just dip 5 in here, let's take this out for a second and just put 5. Does it do what we want? No. Okay, because I'm kind of an idiot. I'm modifying the wrong value. This isn't the vertical slider yet, we're working on the horizontal slider. So we'll go back to the other slider. I'm just going to get rid of this column. So we need a column count because it has to know how many columns wide it is. But I'll show you a trick later how we can get rid of that. Property this.minimum. Then we have to take the absolute value of that. Unfortunately, we don't really have an easy way to do these common calculations at the UX level. You can do this in JavaScript though to save the value of it. Okay. Now this is what we want. Now we have the right number of steps. Now you could also though, because this is we have the duplication, there's a trick with grid where you could actually get rid of this. I'm going to say row count equals 1, and right now it's working in what's called row major mode, meaning the ordering defines rows. So every time, so you have a fixed number of columns, and as you exceed those columns, it creates a new row. We can instead do the column major mode, and then it'll automatically add new columns as necessary instead of rows. So it goes down the rows, so it fills up the rows first, and this becomes child order equals column major, where the default is row major instead. And this does the same thing and lets us do the value just once. This is, for this trick here, it's really just a trick, but if you're doing other layouts, this is really helpful to actually help work with the grids. You can change the ordering mode. And then you only have to put this value once. Our count there is correct. We'll just pretend we don't know what happens if you have a weird count that doesn't line up. It's just going to go wacky on you, because this has to be fixed intervals, and if user step doesn't line up, well, it'll be weird, but this lets you do that. The vertical will be very similar. Shall we do a vertical one? Yeah, let's do a vertical one. Space them out, let's do a couple of them. Don't need one of those. Let's do this one as 5 as well. Let's give this one more interesting. Let's do minus 100 to minus 50. Just to convince ourselves that we've covered all the corner cases. And wanted a horizontal layout. Let's increase the item spacing. Those are way too close together. Okay, now our lines are all off, as we suspected. And it is still quantizing to 5, which is fine. We have such a huge range, we probably don't want 5, we probably want 10 in this case. That'll be 5 steps. I know 5 should be fine, there'll be lots of lines. Now, because the default mode is, as we said here, the child order is row major by default, we put column major here. That means the default is row major, saying if you have one column count, you don't even need row count, because as it fills up the columns, it's just going to create new rows. But we have to do the range here. Property this minimum. Okay, and so we have the range there. And that works for arbitrary values then, going up and down depending on which side you want. Put the high value up top or the low value up top. Okay, the low value is always up top here, sorry. Okay, so no, this is not satisfactory because I actually wanted the other order. I wanted minus 50 to minus 100. You want to go down to convince yourself so it works. There we go. So now the range doesn't matter. We have this working with the range in any order, and we have the stepping working, and we have the little lines working, and we have everything working, and we have the animating to those step values there. I don't know what else I want to do with this right now. Everything's working. Oops, sorry. Everything's working much as I intended. Okay, the only thing I'm not satisfied with is the way the linear range behavior doesn't check its immediate parent, it goes higher up. And I thought I'd fixed that before, and it's disappointing that it's not fixed. But unless you have anything else you want to see now, I think I'm going to call it an end for this, because I don't know what else to add. I've added the lines, added the stepping, added the animation. That should be everything I want to do. And we go all lined up correctly. Alright, so thank you very much for watching if you enjoyed the show. Alright, so all this was here, he was lurking the whole time for us. Yeah, I'm going to upload this to the Git thing. I'll throw it in the comments. Actually, let me see where this is actually. I can do that right now. Throw this in the background. Where am I? Git status, git add dot. Just so I can call git push and see where this goes. GitHub.com should be there. Just throw this over into chat so you can see where it was. This is on, okay, whatever, GitHub.com. Copied the wrong thing. GitHub.com/fuse-tool/mort-ora-y demos is where I'm going to put these things, and that's where it is right now. And I push everything there, and have to take a look. And if you have questions, you can ask me next time, or if you want another episode on the sliders. But I think I've exhausted what I can do with sliders. I'm going to come back to them when I do a component in our new model system, because I'm using them to adjust the RGB values of a color. So I'm making a color selector. I'll use sliders there again. And I don't think they need the lines on them, but we can do a different format of them. Alright, so thank you for watching. Please follow me on Twitch or follow me on Twitter. And then we'll see you next time.